Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This is Bob Philbin at WHBG 20, and this show is called City Beat, where we've invited the beat reporters who cover the city day in and day out. The major network affiliates are here, as well as a representative from the Patriot News. This is a year-end kind of wrap-up on how the news is covered from different perspectives in the city over the year. And we're joined tonight by Kirk Wilson from Channel 21, Eric Veronicas, lead reporter for the city in the Patriot News, Porcha Johnson from WGAL, and Dave Marcheskie, of course, from Channel 27. We're going to be talking about a couple of issues. Right now we're in the middle of a discussion about public safety, and we can kind of continue that for a while. We're going to cover a number of issues that have occurred over the year in kind of a free conversation format. Dave, you made some good points about
you know, obviously we're here in early December, and the talk lately has been a lot of the sexual assault cases, and it's a serious yet sensitive issue on how the police respond to it and report on it. And same thing with us as a news organization and journalists. We're still trying to find that balance on how to get the information out there to keep public safe, but yet trying to keep the victims or alleged victims protected as well.
Yeah, there's several points of view to be discussed. The police point of view, the victim's point of view, protect an investigation, protect the privacy of the victim, and yet get important and emergency, sometimes critically emergency information out to the public. So I'm wondering if there's any difference between a print medium and broadcast in terms of this kind of coverage.
Well, it's becoming much closer nowadays with the social media that's out there. That's where we're told to break news first. So while that was taking place, the manhunt at Hack that day, that Clarence Schaefer was arrested, we had several reporters there, and they were there to work on the story. I was there specifically tweeting live events that were happening as the day went forward. And one of the things I thought was a little frustrating was just, I know the police were there and they had a lot to do, but I guess I would have liked to have just maybe have had some more points where they may have came out and talked to the media, or maybe had some kind of person out there to do that. But I guess that the main difference between print and live TV is that they're a little more timely with the television aspect compared to the newsprint. But we're all doing the website.
Right.
Twitter first, then we go to penlive.com with the follow-up, and then the newspaper the next day.
And with with that said, you know, we need that information now, fast, because we're live like in 30 minutes. So Eric made a good point. Sometimes there's not always, well, most of the time, there's not that point person to go to who can talk to us out there on the field. We have to rely on someone who is not even connected, someone who's at the police station. And that's hard, trying to get information to the public right then and there, especially for a situation like, you know, with the sexual assault that happened involving the Hack student. I mean, we really want that information now, especially if this guy is a danger to the public. I think we need to get that out to the public immediately, that they need to be on alert what's going on. I mean, like you said, we're talking about public safety here.
Well, one point I would note, though, on getting information immediately, you were at the Magisterial District Judge hearing today, and as Chief Bayshore from East Pennsboro Township Police said, the 3 additional charges that were brought against the defendant came after they had an opportunity to further talk about what occurred there and along the river and the creek and the Contra Creek in you know, in West Fairview. And I'm thinking that sometimes it probably takes the victim a while to open up. I know that they have the special centers that were discussed where they go in and there's multiple people behind the glass, police, etc. But there's a person who knows how to talk to the victim of a sexual assault, and you know, so it's believe me, I don't think that you know, we can get answers that quick, because they themselves don't often get them that quickly either.
Well, and that's a good point. It definitely probably does take the victim a while to open up. But in that case, I think that maybe there was just a lack of communication, because that criminal affidavit, it was out the day of Tuesday. I remember getting the complaint, and it said in there that this person was harmed and this person was sexually assaulted. But it wasn't until a week later, today, almost a week later, that we have those additional charges. But it wasn't initially reported last week that the victim was harmed and that the victim was actually sexually assaulted. So it was in that criminal complaint. If you got it, you would see it. It was there. But those additional charges just came about today.
Just to follow up quickly too, and I understand the point, perspective Kirk was just presenting. When there's a manhunt on and Hack is evacuated, there was a lot of unknowns out there, and my family doesn't live too far away from Hack, and I called my wife, said lock your door, because I didn't know what was happening. We didn't know if he was in the vicinity. I wish we would have had just a little more feel for, is there an immediate threat right here? Because I was hearing conflicting reports from different police officers, different people there, so maybe it would have just helped to have someone from one of the police departments as that spokesperson during that day because of the manhunt.
And I do think there was a great deal of confusion, because when I showed up, Dave, you were already there, but I was told that a gentleman had been spotted with a gun on campus that day, and that's the reason that the campus was evacuated. Then I'm later told that no one was excuse me, spotted on campus with a gun. And so that's the sort of information that can be provided quickly and accurately to the media, I think, and then we pass it on to your wife and your neighbors.
It needs to be a forum to be able to do that on the scene, and that's very difficult as a crime is unfolding. Do you think that social media has any impact on that?
Social media has a huge impact. That was my thing, especially when you're dealing with a young group of people such as Hack. I mean, probably most of those kids have smartphones that have Twitter connected around. I mean, I was tweeting live updates kind of as Eric was throughout the whole day, and people were following that for information, just trying to figure out where they should go, what's happening, because not everybody, at that point, Hack has classes throughout the day, so you have people coming in, hearing that it's closed, getting that information out on Twitter. I think they even sent out a text alert. Hack themselves sent out a text alert. So I mean, once the word spreads like wildfire on Twitter, Facebook, then it gets to spreads word of mouth pretty quickly. So I think it has a huge impact. And even if the city or the police department would just have one person to tweet updates, where we as a media and we as people could follow certain updates, that are okayed by one individual inside the police department. I think because we all have the same goal of public safety, and I think that might be better.
I think it's a good idea, but I also think from personal experience that the resources probably aren't there for the department to be able to do that.
A dedicated person to an unfolding crime.
I mean, some police officers talk well, speak well, can give you the information like that. Other ones are hesitant. Some officers don't even have necessarily the accurate information themselves. So, I mean, I that would be wonderful, but I don't see this department or too many police departments having that sort of resource.
Certainly a good idea to consider, though. How the weekly public safety briefings? How helpful are they?
For the most part, it's great. I mean, it gives us something to look forward to on Monday, and just trying to get an idea of what is going on. I think for the most part, the city has been proactive in trying to be transparent with the crimes, for us to get there and then get the information out, because even on those things, we're live tweeting the updates of what happened, whether it be robberies, assaults, that sort of thing. I would maybe, just for my personal point of view, just tweak it just a little bit. I know we usually get the press releases after the press conference. It'd be nice to have that in front of your hand, look at it, then try to ask poignant questions on the information that you have in your hand.
Not only that, but this is talking to the media, but what we get from the briefing is extremely abbreviated compared to when we actually get the news release in hand. There's a great deal more of information contained in that news release that, as Dave said, would be a great help. And your story's not filtering out piece by piece. You're not doing one story at noon and another one, So I think that's a good idea.
Now, the weekend releases went out today. As we speak, we're in early December. The weekend releases went out today, and the press conference is going to be tomorrow. So it's a matter maybe of sequencing when we actually do the press conference, because we have to allow time for the staff to finish their investigations, the bureau, and then actually write the press releases and distribute them. But you know, that's, again, well.
But if you release it today, it's not news tomorrow. You know,
Right,
at
yeah.
the briefing, you know.
Yeah, so,
That's
you know,
true.
again, it's not always easy to implement. Anything else we want to talk about in terms of public safety before we move to?
I would simply like to say that I think that the effort of the city with the rash of assaults on individuals midtown, you know, here down on 2nd Street, we haven't heard that for a while, and the cooperation between the city with the Dauphin County Crisis Response Team, with the Dauphin County District Attorney, even, you know, with the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District, filing some of those charges federally. I think that's made a very positive impact, and I hear people talking about it too. That this was a way to go. You know, Harrisburg, I think, has just happened to be one of those cities. It's unfortunate to have certain groups of people that tend to congregate in the city, and until they commit a crime, you can't make them leave. But I really think that that's gone a long way toward improving the you know, the quality of life in many of the neighborhoods.
Especially downtown. You take a look at downtown now. You've got the Federal Tap House, Buddha Buddha, and some other, you know, new shops that are bringing in a different clientele. And I think people feel a little bit more safer going downtown. And this all happened in what, February, early March, when there was the back-to-back fatal stabbings and that sort of thing. It really has changed from February till now. You know, with just the attitude. I mean, I don't know what the actual statistics are. I mean, it seems like it's getting better. But just I know for the attitude, just going out and about talking to people, that it has changed.
Do you think
Well, Mayor Thompson and the administration, particularly driven by Mayor Thompson, are focused on these issues, and that's how her reaching out and working with other elected officials, I mean, that's a focus.
Well, I'm
That's an
definitely seeing
administration
progress
priority.
because I know at one time the perception was don't go downtown. You don't want to hang out at any of the clubs. Now at least I haven't been hearing about a lot of, you know, fights and you know, assaults and you know, violence after the clubs, and I mean, we haven't been hearing that in the police briefings, at least.
Bob goes downtown now. I see him in the club.
Even I go down.
You go downtown now?
Bob can dance.
Well, people, that's good. People are more comfortable.
I just see
hanging
more
out
foot
at night.
patrol.
But you know, I also think the businesses have played a role in that because
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
we're not.
absolutely.
They're trending towards a different style, a club downtown. The Federal Tap House, that was of course Dragonfly. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
hotbed for crime. Egypt is now Buddha
Buddha
Buddha.
Buddha.
The
Yeah.
Eclipse nightclub is a comedy club. So I think there used to be more of a. It was more of an attraction for the just 21, 22-year-old, but now I think it's
grown
got a
up.
broader
Yeah.
range.
Upscale.
Yeah, for lack of a
Upscale.
better word, it's grown up.
It's matured.
Yeah, it really has.
Well,
There's stuff for
you know,
everyone.
I think you know, just the fact I've never been at any place where businesses actually get involved with public safety and hire, you know, police officers on the weekends to ensure that everyone is safe, you know, while at the club and after the club when the club lets out. And I think that plays a big part.
That's
And-
happening around the city too, not just downtown.
Sure.
But that's a good point, Eric. The bar owners really stepped up.
People are
Right,
talking
Tom?
about it too. It's not
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
a few people noticing. I think a lot of people are coming back downtown because of the new offerings that are there.
And they
Coming
feel
from
safe.
Hershey and the West Shore, and that's kind of a nice segue into, you know, you got the crime, you got the, you know, people coming together, but it also helps the economy here. And I think people are so hungry to get the city back on track fiscally that, you know, they all know it all plays a plan, you know, one hand washes the other. So you watch out for each other, you keep the crime off the streets, you want people to come back to, you know, to get business going, and I think that plays a big role here.
You feel a lot of optimism in the community.
I
towards,
wouldn't say a
towards-
lot, but I mean, we're going a little.
It's going.
But yeah, we're making progress.
More optimism, let me
Yeah.
put it
Yeah.
that way.
We're making progress.
More positive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a bit. Let's talk about the Act 47 process and process of fiscal recovery in the city. You guys are involved in this day in and day out.
Yeah.
What's your take?
It's a lot of fun.
Constant flurry of news, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, let's go back to the beginning. You know, this February, you know, you got a guy in here, David Unkovic. It seemed like, you know, he was finally going to get to the bottom of things, look at the past and try to move to the future. You know, he had the forensic audit going. He leaves, and then you're in another state of uncertainty. And I think in March and April when this happened, it was kind of, where do we go from here? Since the appointing of General Lynch, and he's taken what David Unkovic put in place and the framework and is kind of moving it forward a little bit. You have the sale assets of the Solid Waste Authority in there in Lancaster, and then the parking authority too. It looks like it's on its way.
Right.
So whether you feel the recovery process is good or you want bankruptcy, it just seems like something is happening here.
Curious, one council member tends to like everything but the property tax and earned income tax, and I totally understand that. Is there any possibility to consider revamping the tax structure under this plan, or has that passed, for instance, a 1% sales tax? Something like that might be helpful.
No, I don't think, and I'm not an attorney, nor am I an expert on all the initiatives in the plan, but I don't think that taxation beyond the city is doable without
Legislative authority?
Well, there is some legislative authority there, but it's very limited, and it would actually impact, when you look at the numbers, in order to generate that kind of tax, the city would have to be taxing at a level of the highest municipality around, which I think is Lower Paxton. And the impact would actually double the tax on the current tax, the already increased tax on the citizens in the city.
But I mean,
but
shouldn't the city be asking for additional revenue sources?
Yes,
like
the mayor is asking for additional.
The drink tax, for instance.
The drink tax is one. Also, a package of taxes, but they'd have to be legislative driven. That's
one of the most interesting things that you brought up a good point, Kirk, that we need more revenue. So in essence, we did adopt a commuter tax, but it was just for the residents. So if that would have been imposed, and you would like to raise it above 2% to get money from the surrounding municipalities like Lower Paxton Township and Swadera, because they're at 2%. So you'd have to go up to 2.5 to get anything from them. But even where we're at 2%, with the municipalities surrounding the city, you would actually raise $16 to $17 million a year if you had that in place right now. But there's been a blockade on the Hill against it, even though other towns and cities in the Act 47
Wonder why.
program. Yeah, it's been an interesting thing to watch. But what I wanted to say, just right before we started talking about that, was I think it's interesting now. I think council's on a good course. I hate doubling taxes. I'm paying the 2% EIT myself. But what they're doing is they're saying, from my perspective, they're saying, okay, this is what you want us to do. We told you this isn't going to be enough anyway. So we're going to run through your gauntlet. We're going to jump through your hoops. And we still haven't talked about that stranded debt. So let's see what happens here after we do what you tell us to do. And I think that's kind of what they're doing right now. And then I know I've talked with many people about this. There will be nothing left for this city can do. I mean, they'll get rid of their assets. We can't keep tax. I mean, when do you stop taxing the city residents? So who's that other player who needs to step up at that point? So I think rather than fighting them, now they're saying, okay, let's work with them. And then it's kind of the state's problem at that point, isn't it? They'll have to go to the...
So it was a good decision to get into Act 47 and get the process rolling, even though it was controversial at the time, because we're going to end up with some kind of clarity, some kind of guess at a stranded debt. And we will now, assuming the legislature doesn't take action in January, bankruptcy's back on the table, and we're poised, I think, for an end game now.
And as far as just moving that process forward, I think it does kind of seem like a moment of clarity, or the year of clarity, with all these relationships mending with the mayor and city council and everyone just kind of working together. We didn't see that for a long time. Everyone was not on board at one time. Everyone was not on board with the earned income tax. And now I think, I think both city council and the mayor, I think they're putting the differences behind them and kind of moving forward for the greater good of the city. So that's really good to see. Although we still have, I think there's still that issue with the city controller and the mayor recently, even with the auction, as far as auctioning off the artifacts. So I do see that when I feel like when both parties are working together, it seems like the outcome, I think we can move along a little bit quicker. But with this auction, still we don't know when we're going to have
They
it.
are candidates for the same office, so.
Yeah, absolutely, but we don't know,
Okay.
again, now we
Right.
don't know when we're going to have the auction. It looks like we probably won't even have it in the summer of next year.
I don't
With
know
him,
about
I
that.
mean, he's now appealing, right? He's now appealing the
I think
court
the
order.
process will move more quickly, but you could be right. There's
Yeah.
no way of really knowing.
I think that a great deal, I don't like to use the word blame, perhaps disappointment is a softer word, but the General Assembly, Harrisburg isn't the only community having problems. We know the other Act 47 communities, and now even the small borough of Middletown.
Yeah.
And what it is, it's a statewide problem. And until the General Assembly accepts the responsibility of identifying revenue sources for local governments that are fair and can help meet the needs and spreading it out, there's going to just be one city, one borough, eventually a township after another that are going to find themselves facing that crunch. And, I think part of Harrisburg's problems was personalities in the legislature and in the administration, and that's a shame. But even across the entire 253 members of the House and Senate, you cannot get consensus on how to provide a comfortable revenue stream for local governments. It's been a problem for 25 years that I know of for sure, but it's getting worse as more communities go into Act 47. Other ones consider it, and we know about Scranton, we know about Pittsburgh, but then you have Little Middletown and other smaller communities, and it's going to become epidemic if the General Assembly doesn't step up and accept some responsibility and finally do something.
That's exactly what David Unkovic said during the Senate hearings. When he spoke at the second Senate hearings, he kind of pointed a little bit of blame at the city leaders, but more so at the state. Basically giving these townships and municipalities enough rope to hang themselves, and they did, and they are, and they're going to continue to until they restructure the tax code and how municipalities get revenues. It's just going
Let
to
me
get worse.
pause for just a second to remind our viewers, if they don't already know it, that Kirk Wilson is the former mayor of Carlisle, so he brings a special knowledge to this discussion. Eric, you going to say something?
I agree totally with what you two just said. I think the big problem is there's no one brave enough on the Hill to really step out front and take charge and get some people behind him or her, because you're inevitably probably talking about some sort of tax, and tax is no good for re-election. And people who push for taxes, even if it means helping your municipalities that are hanging from a cliff.
Well, we've got new elected officials now in the Senate and the House.
Right.
Any,
And let's
any
exactly.
predictions
We'll
there?
see.
Well, we have
Too soon
We
to
have
tell?
Patty
Yeah, it's way
Cam.
too soon
Yeah.
to tell. We had people who 10 years ago were newly elected officials, realizing that there was a problem with providing a revenue stream for local governments, and 10 years later, those same officials who are now veterans haven't done a thing. So I don't get excited, when we talk about new members. They're probably the most hesitant for a couple of years to do anything. It's the leadership and it's the more senior members that need to realize the problems that exist, and they listen to their constituents who don't want any new taxes or don't want taxes raised. And in the personal opinion, they're not going to vote for a new tax stream because while it may help the municipality in the long run, it may get them defeated at the next election.
You guys start the whole process over again.
No, I think it's a good thing, especially with Patty Kim succeeding Representative Ron Buxton, being that she was a city council person. I think that she'll be able to. I mean, you got the bankruptcy on the table now. That is pretty much that's an option for Harrisburg. I think she'll have a different perspective, maybe say a different perspective than maybe Representative Ron Buxton would have had, because she actually sat in that seat and she was making decisions for the people here in Harrisburg. So it'll be interesting to see.
Well, and the problem is she's only one.
Yeah, she's the only one.
Yeah, they have to have a
She's the only one.
coalition
Yes,
of
exactly.
the
She's not the only
municipalities that are under Act 47 too.
But we also have a new senator coming in who seems to be of
Yeah.
like mind.
Templates.
And,
Yeah.
and that's kind of
Good point.
encouraging to a certain degree. I mean,
Templates.
so that's 2, but we're getting there.
It really would be nice to see something play out with this, with the Marcellus Shale too. I mean, it seems like everybody's talking about this is the next Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is right here in Pennsylvania, and right now, I mean, there seems to be no plans for it to be taxed, and it seems like a multi-billion-dollar industry just waiting to be, you know, tapped basically. And it seems like a good revenue stream, not just for, you know, the state, but you know, the municipalities. If I don't know what they could do with that, I mean, there's numerous different ways it could help your education system. You know, Harrisburg has a failing educational schools too. They're on the brink of, you know, of a state takeover, if you will. So there's lots of, you know, ideas that could be floated around to do with that money, and could be a new revenue stream for the future.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. But you know, the governor said no new taxes, and you know, whether it be a tax or whatever, sometimes we need to, you know, be realistic. We need to look at the situation. You know, it's one thing to say as a candidate or even in your first year as governor, but you know, the fact of the matter is, I remember when I first ran for mayor, I had all these ideas that I was going to do, and I was going to get them done my first year. Well, you get into office, and all of a sudden you find out that, oh no, well, that's not even going to work. That's not a good idea. So maybe of the 26 I had in my first campaign, 2 of them were things that could actually be implemented and be helpful. So you have to be willing. You know, I think you have to be willing to change your mind. You know, and you know, I've changed my mind as an elected official, and you know, yeah, some people will let you have it, but other ones respect you for your willingness to say, "I was wrong." And I think that's what we need here in our state capital. I worked in the Senate for 7 years and the House of Representatives for 3 years. As a staffer, I worked for a governor for 7 years. So, you know, I know and I can see all the different, you know, heads that are knocking together up there and accomplishing not too much.
With that experience, I'm just kind of curious. I mean, do you think these politicians will, instead of giving promises, campaign promises, to maybe be more realistic in future campaigns, or is that always just going to be kind of, hey, this is what I can promise you? Because when you actually get in, like you said, you know, you can't do it. You just physically, you know, literally cannot do everything that you promised. You know, so can you run on and say, hey, these are my key 3 things that pretty sure I hope and think I can get done?
Well, I think that, in all honesty, when you run as a freshman, you should be right up front and say,
Don't run
look,
on promises.
You know, I can't make any promises. I'm going to be one of 203 in the House of Representatives or one of 50 in the Senate, you know, but, you know, here's my general thoughts along these lines. This is legislation I would support. This is legislation that I wouldn't support. You know, so you never want to take credit for doing something. Let somebody else take the credit, but be a part of the success. And I think it's tough, but I just don't see that there's a sense of camaraderie between the Republicans and Democrats. I don't see a sense of camaraderie between the House and the Senate. And I don't see a sense of camaraderie between the governor and the legislature. And until that develops, and as someone said, it appears to have developed here in Harrisburg between the administration and city council, you can see how it works. You know, my belief is that, okay, let's see it happen on the Hill, and I think we can go a long way. We have to put our personal interest, or elected officials have to put their personal interests aside, not worry about being reelected, but by doing the job.
Because I think a lot of politicians forget that it is about civic service and public service.
Yeah.
And I think the skepticism and the cynicism that kind of goes along with, you know, year after year, and the general public kind of tunes it out. So we can cover politicians as much as possible and try to get the ideas and issues out. But a lot of people don't want to, they don't care or read, because they just feel the overall won't be able to change.
Exactly.
So.
Well, we're approaching a crisis, aren't we? At some point down the road.
In local government, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, not just the city of Harrisburg,
yeah.
and not just third-class cities. You know.
And
Yeah,
the Act 47 program really, and I think that's produced some good momentum, but it doesn't have teeth, it appears, to completely solve this situation. It's going to take a lot more. There's 27, I believe, municipalities that have been in it, and maybe 5 or 6 have exited the program. Scranton had a commuter tax. They got rid of it. Now they're looking to put it back in because they're still broke. They're paying their employees $7.50 an hour. They've been in the program for over 20 years. Reading just readopted a commuter tax. They're a third-class city. They were allowed to because their Act 47 team actually saw the writing on the wall and backed them. There was no way to close the budget cap. There's no other way to do it. So they've been in the program for probably 5 years now, and they're not any further ahead than they were before. It's the Act 47 program. It sounds great, but they're not giving the program the tools it needs to work. So it's almost like they're going in circles, and we'll and of course Harrisburg sees it, where we've had to go to. Last year it was the parking authority to get $7 million to cover the budget hole, and I hope next year we'll really see this unfold, but I hope we're not going to those emergency fixes.
No, I don't think
again
we ought
next
to
year.
put a realistic, unbalanced budget on the table as a start to deal with the real fundamental issues, instead of playing financial games where you can make some dollars disappear. But Harrisburg is a unique Act 47 city for a couple of reasons.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And we should talk about that.
Obviously, the incinerator being the number one thing.
Yeah.
There's so much debt that the city has to cover, but it's not. It's also the debt that they're trying to pay down, but the structural deficit year after year kind of doesn't get talked about enough. I feel. A lot of people, I don't want to say forget about it, but it's
two separate tracks.
Yeah,
right?
it is two, right. And you have the structural deficit is more of an impact than the debt in some cases, because it deals with the year-to-year, the day-to-day, finances of the city and people's safety and welfare and that sort of thing.
And speaking of the year-to-year, I mean, this was what, 28 years of the former mayor, in his policies and the way he tackled the yearly deficit. I mean, from what we hear from what the mayor said, that you all the city got rid of the year-to-year deficit by taking out loans.
Right.
And I mean, that was ongoing. So I think that is a big difference when you talk about our deficit and our money issues, and when you compare that to other municipalities.
The other thing is that Harrisburg is in a state of fiscal distress by direct order of the governor. So we have a receiver that, unlike any other Act 47 city that I'm aware of. And the other thing is half of the city's real estate's untaxable, can't be taxed.
And half of that is taken up by the state.
Right.
And nonprofits.
Yeah.
And we get about $2.5 million a year from them, from the state. I imagine if they could kick in some more
So that's where
through
you're
a pilot
debt
program.
solution. Yeah.
And I just want to throw this in, not to get off topic, digress, but it was interesting to see is that even through all this, our financial distress, there are still businesses coming into the city. I think the mayor has had several, press conferences. We've had ribbon
1,700
cuttings.
new licenses in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it amazes me that people still look at the city as a place to invest.
Well, actually, it's an opportune time to invest in the city. I know you're invested in the city, right?
Yeah, you
For
can.
now.
No, I mean, I love the
That is over
city.
the long haul.
I love the city, and before I was married, my wife has a house in the city, and I do too, so we rent one. But I'm excited about the stuff happening in Midtown and up on 6th Street and the 7th Street corridor. There are reasons to be in Harrisburg. Ask Ralph Vartown and Dan Deichman and those guys. It's a beautiful city. You have the state capitol here, and there is some weight to having Harrisburg address for your business, if you're an attorney, etc. So I think there
There's
are
a whole industry around the state complex that
absolutely.
And it gets back to your
really
point
needs
about
to be here.
It does, with the taxes. The interesting point is Harrisburg has a population, just shy of 50,000 people that actually live in the city. But on a daily basis, you've got all those people coming in for business. But it goes back to like the commuter tax. What maybe those extra revenues could provide to a city such as this that come into it to work, then they kind of leave to go home.
Well, let me be the downer.
There's always one.
No. The day of the press briefing that turned into the dog calling, the case where the acts were, simultaneously that same day a dog had to be killed by a police officer. Well, that day sent me up into some neighborhoods trying to find, dogs on leashes and that sort of thing. And although I've been on, most of the major streets, going on the side streets and down the alleys, I was surprised at just how poor the housing stock is in this city. And you know, we're looking at one block where the housing is deplorable, and right beside it, using funds, there's soon going to be a house available for sale for $120,000, when right next door is this very, you know, dilapidated structure that people were still living in. I don't honestly know the answer for the city, but there are a lot of vacant buildings. You know, a lot of them are in major disrepair. And does tearing them down do anything? Well, it makes it look a little better, but how do you build up the housing stock in this city? I mean, I think from what I've seen, Midtown is a perfect example. A lot of people are moving into Midtown, and they're taking those fine old homes and renovating them into almost back to, you know, their grandeur, you know, from when they were first constructed. But some of the neighborhoods could really use some help in improving the housing.
But I think it's, I mean, like a backlog. It's so, I mean, there's like, what, 300 and something condemned properties in the city. And how do you tackle each one?
You do it year by year.
It takes time. It really takes time.
It's a matter of finance.
Do you think the legislation that was just adopted, the rental legislation for the landlords, will play a part in cleaning that up? The housing
I think
stock?
it'll play a part in the crime element, just to give you my opinion. It'll play an element in the crime level, where there's drugs being dealt, guns going off. If you start to go up, and then it becomes a little more problematic. But the landlords need to understand this is in their interest. They can use this legislation to construct their lease arrangements so that they are able to you know, turn over renters quickly if they become a problem. But that's you know, that's just one of a multifaceted problem that the city deals with day in and day out, and always has and probably always will.
Maybe connected to that, part of that legislation too, and I know it's not the intent, but if there are problems happening at a certain address and then the code inspector or the police come there and they do see that a building is not up to code, they can condemn that property.
They do. That's in the legislation.
So, right, so I think that could work to the city's advantage in that respect too, with the housing stock. But yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when you think about it, I mean, it's a laundry list of issues that need to be tackled, and you said you can take it one chunk at a time, and it's difficult.
It's a very old city, and you just have to deal with it.
And especially too with that legislation, I think I don't know, the property or the landlord, whoever the complaint is against, that person has to be found guilty before you can actually condemn the property. From what I was told by the codes administrator, that person has to be found guilty in a court of law. So that takes a lot of time. I mean, you can't just condemn the property and say, look, you're out. You have to go through the court process.
A lot of red tape.
Yeah.
Well,
so.
But you can't rent while that process is going on.
Okay.
So.
One of the things I discovered early on in my political career was that you cannot solve problems with legislation. You know, there were things that I thought, you know, let's do this, let's do that, it's going to clean up a problem. It didn't. You know, you've got to be able to work on an issue face to face with the problem with the appropriate local government agency and with the appropriate involved person.
Like cleaning up crime on 2nd Street, for example.
Yeah. You can't legislate a community into a quality neighborhood. You can pass as many ordinances as you want, but enforcement of them, you know, could drive you crazy, maybe challenged in court, and it goes up and up and up further. So, you know, I not one to look at specific pieces of legislation as the final answer to solving the problem.
What about good news? This has been a good year, and has to be have been a good year in many ways. What's the upbeat?
Well, I think it was a very good year because I returned to television news.
That's a highlight of the year.
That's
for
right,
you,
exactly.
It's been an interesting year with everything that's been said and done. I will say, I know this is kind of shifting gears totally, but the city, we know that there's always an opportunity to try to get in touch with you, and I think compared to last year's floods in late September and then how Hurricane Sandy was played out this year, I just thought the city, the county handled everything perfectly. I mean, that's the sort of type of situation where the information was given out on, you know, on a pretty steady basis, and I thought the city and the county handled that well.
Yeah, I think everyone was
And
ahead
everybody
of the
too. Everybody
storm.
heeded the warnings. The Red Cross situation was set up at the high school, and people went there, and I think it was fine. It would also help that it wasn't as bad as it was last year
that
too.
too.
Yeah, that helped, but we certainly were prepared, and it
We had
showed.
slammed Long Island and
Yeah.
New Jersey. And
Yeah.
good news
Y-
from the Patriot?
Yeah, I think just with the storms, the city's ability to bounce back is pretty amazing. When I remember covering Shipoke and seeing those people and what they were going through, and they did a lot of hard work. The city did a lot of hard work, and you know, it just seems to bounce back from whatever hits it. Takes a while, but I think the people in Harrisburg are tough.
Tough city, right?
Resilient
Yeah.
city, and I think
That's
that,
right.
that goes to its character. I got one for you. The baseball park going over at Berry Hill at the Boys and Girls Club. That was one of my favorite
Yeah,
ones.
that
I
was
think that'll
wonderful.
be.
That was a
I think
wonderful
that'll
day.
be great for those kids in that area, especially when you're talking about blight. I know we've done several stories along Berry Hill, and off those couple streets there, it's pretty deplorable. So to have a diamond in the rough, so to speak, I think will be good.
Yeah.
And the Hamilton Health Center, it's awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
Good
a huge one. I remember going to the old Hamilton Health Center to do a story, and then seeing that new one. It's like a whole different world.
State of the art.
Mhm.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah.
And
Well located.
And I mean, Charles Bellamundo, I mean, that's just a small restaurant, but you talk about being resilient and how the city is able to bounce back. I mean, a small business, which
from
was pretty
Shipoke
popular,
to
moves to
Midtown, yeah.
Shipoke, and
Yep,
it's
yeah.
even larger. It's bigger and better, now. So,
I think one of the neat things is the way the Midtown bookstore kind of serves as an anchor for that area. It's interesting just to walk in there during the day and to see how much activity goes on in there.
It's
I can
always
only
great to
imagine
look
that
at.
when I'm home at night and on weekends, there's an even greater amount. And I think that's a positive thing to have a little anchor like that. Every neighborhood should try to have something. Not necessarily a bookstore, but something that they can look to and kind of say this
Eric
delineates
Pappas
our
was
neighborhood.
doing an
Yeah.
outstanding job in that, developing that.
All right, so I'm curious. What you all cover the city here. What was the craziest story that you did this year? Your most memorable or
craziest
Yeah.
story.
Wow.
I think one I covered last week.
Yeah, I mean that was the manhunt of that
Yeah.
that story with the hack attack was
Oh, you're talking about
He
the
meant,
manhunt. I
oh,
meant the
the,
chamber video.
Chamber video.
Oh,
The
the
chamber video. Oh, wow.
yeah.
That was interesting.
But I think the creepiest thing, and I hate to use that word, but I know Bob was there. I know Portia was there. I'm not sure if you guys were there. Was the day that David Unkovic called the impromptu press conference.
Oh yes,
That
yeah,
was-
that was
was
caught me off
amazing.
guard. But yeah, he was a little hysterical during the press conference that you were talking about. I think he seemed really frustrated with the creditors involving the whole incinerator deal, that he wasn't able to get everyone to come together, sort of thing, and he just kind of broke loose.
He didn't pull any
Lashed
A lot of
punches.
pressure.
out, yeah.
It's a lot of pressure.
No, I
Yeah.
remember he called me that morning, and you could tell. Like Dave was an eccentric guy to begin with, but he called me, and you could tell something was wrong, something was off. And I said, all right, we'll be there. I ended up not going personally, but we had someone there. And he hung up the phone, called me back, was like, hey, I called you guys, and I called Fox 43. Who else should I call? I was like,
Nobody.
No, nobody else. That's what I told him. I said, nobody else. He was like, oh. I was like, I'm just kidding, Dave. I said, you might want to call 821.
How about alternative media in the city? Harrisburg is interesting for the alternative media that I see anyway, from my point of view, operating in the city. You guys have any take on that, or I'm talking about Roxbury and
Oh, okay.
The bloggers.
Yeah.
and the bloggers and what is it, the Berg and
Today's the day, Harrisburg.
today's and
I love
couple
the
of print
Berg.
publications.
I think the Berg does a great job. They really do. It's like the hometown community. Like
yeah, it's like neighborhood.
it's a neighborhood newspaper, and they do a good job. They find unique stories in the city, and I think they're really great at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
The internet, gives people an outlet, a voice.
Mm-hmm.
We're all affiliated with a media outlet that has a long history, whether it be ABC, NBC, CBS, and the Patriot News, has been the go-to newspaper, not just in Harrisburg, but the surrounding area for years.
Mm-hmm.
And then the internet, with the evolving internet, you have your certain bloggers, and not discrediting them, they do a fantastic job, but I think their readers have to take it with, a grain of salt and kind of know that, because it's more opinion
Right.
than
Impressions. And,
not saying they don't have journalistic integrity, because I think they do. It's just they have they don't have a boss to talk to. Let's put it that way.
Right.
I mean,
There
we all have bosses.
level.
I think I was going to say that too.
That's kind of where it boils
That's the
down to.
difference. It's nice to have a blog because you can put a lot more opinion out there, rather than trying to just stay straight down the middle and get both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see a lot of that in the blogs around here, and they have a lot of followers in the city, and they're very vocal, and they do what they do, and I think that's great. They're not Roxbury. One of the most impressive things about that guy is just that he's everywhere. And he's one man, and he's got a camera. He's just everywhere. I disagree with him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We argue, but I've had a pretty good relationship with him over the years, and I'm just impressed with his energy.
Mm-hmm.
And they can
And he's
cover
a
a lot
good
of things
source
that
on-
they can cover a lot of things that we can't cover. Like Dave said, they're their own bosses. We have bosses, and there's some things we may not cover, because for whatever reason, just when we get into that producers meeting, there are some things that we feel like may not look good on the station, and I think Roxbury and other bloggers, they can do whatever they want, and if you have a bad opinion about what they do, then you just do. They don't have a boss telling them, like reprimanding them, or saying like you shouldn't have done that sort of thing.
Can you tell our viewers a bit about the process of the news, what you go through, how
Well, it's
stories
different,
are
right, for
developed?
print and
Yes.
broadcast.
Yes. Anybody want to kick it off?
I don't know. The process, usually we have our editorial meeting, we have our producers, reporters meeting in the morning at 9:30, and we go through what we're going to do for that day. Usually us reporters, we pitch our ideas, and I'm a beat reporter, so I'll pitch everything that's going on. I usually call you before the meeting, and I call all my different sources, and I'll check out Patriot News or whatever, and then I will tell them this is the news for the day, and I usually have like a package, a solid story that we can develop that day as well. And then, my executive producer, whoever is, heading that meeting, will say, I think that's a good idea, or no, I don't think that's a good idea. Maybe we should pursue this. But after that meeting, we know what we're going to do for the rest of the day. That's why it's really important that I get all my people in line before that 9:30 meeting. I need to make sure that I talk to you, or I talk to Lieutenant Fagan, or whoever my sources are before that morning meeting, so we know how we're going to go about our day. And that's usually what happens. Then we have breaking news or whatever, it may throw us off course.
How much control do you have over your story?
I think we have, I don't know, it's maybe different for every station. But I think I have a lot of control in a sense, because this is my beat. No one knows this beat better than I do. And so when I tell my producers, ultimately they have the final decision, but I'm telling them everything that's going on, and this is a story we need to do. This is what's hot in Harrisburg right now.
And I noticed when we do have those chats, that at the end of the day, what you air is really what you discussed, at 9:30 in the morning.
This is
like
what,
you do have a lot of
I'm really their,
control.
the eyes and ears. So I'm kind of the expert. So I would say that I have, control to a point. They have the final decision, but yeah.
I find that we pretty much work the same way, although you have beats. We only have beats in Lancaster and York.
Okay.
So I could end up anywhere in multiple counties, but usually
You do spend a lot of time in the city, though, Kirk.
I do spend a lot of time in the
Especially
city.
press conferences.
You're assigned an angle usually. But I think we have a fair amount of control. The direction comes from the desk, we call it, you know. And from there, it's pretty much what the reporter and the photographer jointly are able to put together for audio and video. And
So
content.
It kind of goes back to like what Eric was talking about. Even though we're broadcasting these print, we're closer than we've ever been before. I mean, obviously with the reduction of the newspaper, but they're going full steam ahead with PennLive.com on their website.
Getting out in
And
front,
you know,
yeah.
now as a reporter, I not only have to worry about my air copy, my air story, but I have to worry about my web story and the other, you know, tweeting and social media. So not only am I an on-air reporter, I'm a social media reporter, I'm a web reporter, you know. And now we have just got a deal, ABC 27 struck a deal with the radio stations. So now we do reports on the radio station. So we're trying to, all journalists are coming towards that multi-platform media, you know, thing where we are competing with the print guys now more than ever. I guess the only difference still being is that they don't have to put on makeup at the end of the day.
Yeah, we don't like to pay. Well, I know
They don't
that.
get to dress like you do.
I don't like to, and usually I don't, but, you know, pitch stories that are already in the newspaper, Patriot News. You know, if my producer hears that, you know, that story was from the newspaper, unless it's a, you know, a huge story, I mean, we don't want to tackle it. So we are competing even with
Eric,
the
I guess you're the most
Patriots.
traditional platform out there that's merging into the future.
Yeah, that's true. Each week, I was off today, but I send my editors what we call beat notes, and that's the stories I'm going to do that week. That's what I plan on doing. Of course, that changes in the middle of the week, so I'll send them 5, 6 ideas, and the ones I know I'm going to land, I try to say when and try to forecast it. That can change, but as far as control, they encourage us to be the CEO of our beats, so you know, that's what we are, and so I'm finding the stories, and I think the control part comes in when you turn your story in and they start rearranging paragraphs.
Right.
As far as story ideas and things like that, I'm sending that in the beginning of the week. If there's some hot story ideas, and sometimes I might have it projected out further in the week, though. You're going to write that today. So that happens too. But as far as the ideas go, we have a lot of freedom there. And so a lot of shaking the bushes to get those so that you're not dry at the...
And how are your stories merchandised? Are they, you're tweeting at the same time? You're providing web content?
Sure.
And your stories tend to evolve, which is
Right.
interesting to watch as you update the story.
So everything in the paper is a second day angle. The Twitter is bam, okay, it's happening. Go online, add a couple graphs to it. It's funny because before we started doing Twitter, it was just do that on PennLive. Bam. Go onto the. But so we don't want people reading the same thing they read online, so we're going to find a second day angle. And
just question, I mean, in a sense, do you feel like the newspaper is competing with us? Do you compete with us?
oh,
really?
absolutely.
Okay.
But I like you guys.
Well, that's just
Okay,
No,
and
and
it's
I'll tell you straight up.
yeah,
You know,
we all
we follow you guys, and if you're there as like the cops reporter, and sometimes I get, you know, you got to do your shift on the cops desk. Sometimes, you know, 11 o'clock news comes on. We watch, make sure you guys don't have anything before we do, and,
Okay.
and turn it off about 10 minutes later and head over.
Everybody does the same. I mean, all of our producers, news directors watch each other to make sure we don't miss anything, and vice versa. Now, the interesting point is, you know, back to the social media and the Twitter. I might have something that these guys don't have, and it's like you want to get on Twitter because you want to break the story, but yet you don't want to tip them off before
Absolutely.
8
'Cause
print
we
time
follow you.
or broadcast, right? Because you follow them. So it's trying to strike that fine balance, like, you know, do I
Yeah,
go with this now
absolutely.
or do I wait? You know, hold off. So it's a lot of gamesmanship, but again, you know, we're out in the field. If it's a press conference, we help each other out because
Yeah,
we're getting the
so
same
we're
stuff
gonna get
anyway.
Yeah, I've
Same
seen that
stuff.
many
But
times.
you raised a very good point, because if I know that these guys aren't going to find out about it, you're not going to read it on Twitter. Probably not even PennLive right away. Because
manage
it's
your
someone
product.
that's, and you know, if I'm working with a source on something, but if I know it's something they're going to find out 5 or 10
Exactly.
minutes later.
You're trying to get there as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Well, we're running out of time here, and I want to thank you all. This has been really informative. I think the public's going to be better informed on how complicated your job is.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's getting more complicated all the time, more complex all the time. So I want to thank you all for being here, and we're going to do this, I think, as much as we can. With Kirk Wilson from Channel 21, Eric Veronicus, lead beat for the Patriot News, the lovely Porcha Johnson, who's representing NBC's affiliate WGAL, and of course Dave Marcheskie, who's keeping everything alive and vital at Channel 27. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.